Hey everybody, it's Sean Gibbons from the Communications Network. Thank you for being with us on this rather warm Wednesday. Expect that's true wherever you might be. You are here probably because we are about to have a conversation about the U.S. Census, which I know you all know is just about the sexiest subject being debated or discussed in America just now. And so we're going to get to that in a quick minute. But as we're entering the room, we're going to do a couple things that we've made our practice. We're going to tell you a couple things just to make you aware. And we're also, as a start, if you would, go ahead and open up the chat box. You can do that by taking your finger or whatever it is you use to manipulate your computer. Go on down and a bar should pop up. We're living a Zoom life. Chances are you're familiar with this. Pop into the chat if you would. Make sure you're talking, so it's preset down there. You see a little blue thing. Make sure you're talking to all panelist attendees, so we're talking to one another. And then let's just take that idea we've been borrowing from Professor Brene Brown, that two-word check-in, and let's go ahead and just say hello, who you are, where you're coming in from, and the two words to describe kind of where you're at right now. And I'll start by just trying to see if I can scratch this out here. Hi, everyone. If I can type, hey, it's Sean. Hey, Lisa, how are you up in Michigan? Doing good. That's a good way to be. Others, let's go ahead and start jumping in here. Mary, how are you up in New York? Excited and energized. I want what you had for lunch, Mary. Rebecca, oh, well, Rebecca, you're leading the webinar, but thrilled to be here. Excited about that. Amy in Connecticut, overwhelmed, but still inspired. Yeah, those polarities are really kind of present for all of us just now and have been for months. It's like 2020 will be the year that has like two words, right? Like whatever they may be for us, but they seem like they're sitting on opposite ends of the spectrum. Caitlin, how are you down in DC? And Valerie in Virginia, y'all are just in my backyard here. Hey, Deborah coming in from St. Croix. Frustrated today, but good to be here with the community. Well, we're glad to have you. Maria, how are you? Hey, Ray, how are you? Empowered and confident. Good way to be. All right, a couple of other just pieces of housekeeping for you. Our colleague Tristan Mahabir, as he always does, is running the deck, so he's behind the scenes for us. Our colleague Kareem Alston is going to be making good notes on Google, so we'll have those to share with you after this webinar concludes. And speaking of, we're going to record it, so we'll make it available for you. Maybe we'll be able to post it a little bit later today, but certainly sometime tomorrow, so welcome to share it with friends and colleagues there. Our colleague Sarah Ferris, as she always does, sheltering down in DC, she is making notes on Twitter, so if you're one of those folks, hey Bridget, hey Sherry, hey Abigail, if you are one of those folks who's on Twitter or can manage two screens, she's using the hashtag ComNetLive. It's COMNETLIVE. So you can all follow along there. Hey, Andrea up in Michigan, happy to be here. And Bridget, overwhelmed and overheated. Yeah, it's a way to be. It is hot and it is a lot coming at us all. And we're going to talk about that more in just a minute. Mr. T, if you would, go ahead and just take it to the next slide. I'll move through these super fast, everybody, because my chances are you know this stuff. So, okay, we'll go to this one first. So ComNetwork Local, you know this. There's 17 cities around the country that are gathering where we're building community among folks who do comms for good. Later today, if I'm not mistaken, Denver is getting together. And tomorrow, our friends in Seattle are gathering. They're going to have Dr. Clarence B. Jones, our good friend, and a mentor to many of us who helped to write the Dream speech with Dr. Martin Luther King. They're going to be gathering in Seattle. You can get all that information. Kareem, maybe you can toss that into the chat here, but links to that at comnetwork.org. And so grateful to all of you. I know Boston's gathering in a couple of weeks' time and others, but if you want to take a look, maybe there's a local group that's gathering near where you live, and right now we're all virtual, so welcome to even pop into Seattle, even if you're sitting in Miami or wherever that may be. All right, Mr. T, if you'll take it ahead. ComNetwork V. So this is a really cool thing. You'll, again, probably know this, 63 days from today, we were gonna be in Atlanta. Obviously, the world has demanded we need to do things a little bit differently, but since our purpose is to connect and gather and keep our field informed, we're gonna gather virtually. And it's gonna be a grand experiment, and we'd be grateful if you'd like to be part of it. V is gonna be free, thanks to the underwriting of a lot of really tremendous organizations. We're also gonna do this thing called V+. Best way to think about that maybe is it's an extended or enhanced experience where you're going to be in community. You're going to be put into a small group of colleagues, sort of just randomly cross-pollinated with other colleagues who are working at other organizations doing similar work to what you're doing. And you'll be in community with them to sort of go on this journey through V, but then through the elections and some of the other big events we'll all be contending with this fall. So welcome you to be part of that, and you can learn more at comnetworkvirtual.org. Again, Kareem probably will toss that into the chat so you can get there if you need to. Mr. T, do we have one more, or is this my turn to, the last one? Yeah, deadline coming up for this. Just want to tell y'all, Frank Carell Scholarship. So this is a really cool thing. Thanks to our friends at Rockefeller, we are able to, this year, because we're virtual, we're going to offer 50 free seats to nonprofit staffers, to academics, and to graduate students who have financial need. So otherwise couldn't be with us, and they'll all be invited to take part in that V+ I was just talking about, that 3-month extended experience of being in community with other folks doing work around comms for good. The deadline for that, and this is the big deal, it's Friday. So we're accepting applications on a rolling basis. 25 of those scholarships we're reserving for folks either in Atlanta, in Georgia, or more broadly in the American South. And then the other 25, we're going to make available globally. So if many of you had the opportunity to meet our friend Edith, who came in from Kenya last year, we're looking for other folks like Edith coming in from wherever they may be hailing from across the globe. So Kareem just put a link in there. If y'all wouldn't mind, please help us get the word out, because this is going to do a lot of good. We're grateful to all the folks who've been Carell Scholars in the past, and we want to bring together a really great group of folks this year to learn alongside us. So thanks to you in advance for doing that. And now I'm going to stop yakking and pass it over to my new friends, Rebecca and Janine. And I think Rebecca's going to kick it off, and we're going to talk about the census for the next little while. There, frankly, is a lot to talk about because there was some news coming out just yesterday, which we'll have a chance to explore together. So with that, Rebecca, you want to take it away?
Thank you so much, Sean, and thank you, Tristan, for doing all this behind the scenes. We're so excited to be afforded the opportunity to partner with the Communications Network on this event. It probably couldn't be more timely. The census has been all over the news, and we're going to talk about that, and I'm really looking forward to fielding some questions and answers. I saw so many people in the chat box were saying they were some dichotomy of anxious and hopeful, or worried but ready to go, and I feel like that's how we all feel right now. You know, there's so much happening, and there's going to be a lot more happening with the census, but we always have a joke here that we're all a bunch of hope junkies and democracy junkies, and so we can just keep going no matter what is thrown our way. I'm so happy to be here, so happy to kick off this PowerPoint, which are not always the most exciting thing, but so Janine and I are going to kick it back and forth and hopefully keep it a little bit interesting and live. And as I start, I just want to frame the conversation that we're about to have, because I think our founder frames it the best when she says a lot of people think the census is about statistics or math. It's not. It's about money and power and who gets it and how it's distributed. And that's how we think a lot throughout all of our work. So we'll move to the next slide and talk a little bit about what we'll cover. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our origin and an overview of our work. Janine's going to really go into what is the census and what is at stake with the census. We'll go back and talk a little bit about the challenges pre-COVID and also the current challenges in this unprecedented time. And then Janine's going to finish us up with what we can do going forward today to ensure a complete and accurate count and make sure that we protect democracy. Oh, and that picture, awfully cute. That's a lot of our team right there. So we'll go ahead and move into the origin and overview on the next slide. And in fact, we can actually pop it to the next one too. So Fair Count was founded by Stacey Abrams, and we are anchored in Georgia, but we have national reach. When Stacey wrapped up after the electoral season in 2018, she went and thought about what she still wanted to get accomplished and what she could still do. And so she started a couple of different organizations. One, she started Fair Fight Action, which many people have heard of because they're kind of all over the nation doing voter suppression work. And they're a C4 organization, and we don't coordinate with them. She started another organization called SEEP, which is the Southern Economic Policy Alliance, which really takes sort of policy that deals with economics and other things and makes it speak Southern. You know, how is it going to work in the very different atmosphere that happens in the Deep South? And then she started Fair Count, because Stacey learned very early in her political career that you can't have fair and accurate elections, or a fair and accurate redistricting, or fair and accurate representation and resources distribution if you don't have a fair count in the census, and has really seen what happens when communities go undercounted historically. So she started Fair Count. I was thrilled when she tapped me to be its CEO. I had, prior to my work, I'm actually a social worker by trade, but I worked for about 18 years in political and advocacy in Georgia and around the nation. And I was delighted to be able to come and take this role and move out of the political and electoral space. I could never have guessed the good fortune I would have to start this organization with Dr. Janine Abrams McLean, or Dr. J, as I like to call her. It feels really weird to talk about you like you're not here on this webinar with me, Janine. But one of the most serendipitous things that really could have happened, well, besides putting the two of us together, I think, is that Janine, prior to this, had her PhD in evolutionary biology and specialized in population-based research, and also did a lot of virus work at the CDC. And so she left the front lines of public health to be on the front lines of democracy. And well, we all know how those two have sort of come together. The next slide is a bit about our mission. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization to ensure that every single person is counted in Georgia and around the nation for a fair and accurate count, and to continue to build out pathways to continued civic participation. This is really important, our mission, for a couple of different reasons. One, we really saw room in the ecosystem for more nonprofit, nonpartisan work that does civic engagement work. There is real space for us in the realm of voter education and vote by mail, and in census work, and in redistricting work. And we have a real voice, and we often can be a very trusted voice in the nonprofit realm, because we don't care who you vote for. We don't care who it is, what party you have allegiance to. We care about the values that we bring to the table and make sure that people get organized around that. So I think all of you that are supportive of that work and of C3 work that is out there doing democracy work and civic engagement work, because it is a dire need and there's a big space to fill it. And also, I want to talk a little bit about the continued civic participation piece of that. Fair Count believes in its sort of truest to truest hearts what we know to be true, which is communities that have been undercounted by the census are often the same communities that don't have resources for voter education and mobilization efforts. Maybe they're more likely to experience voter suppression or be disenfranchised from exercising their constitutional rights, as well as having their communities sliced and diced up by redistricting. So while the census is the ultimate goal right now and for this year, it is really also just a catalyst to bring more people into the civic participation realm. And if we start working with the historically marginalized and disenfranchised communities that the census misses counting every time they do the decennial census, and we start really pouring in resources, long-term power building within communities in a non-extractive organizing way, meaning we don't just go in there once you get counted from the census and never hear from us again. We're using the census as that catalyst to start that the communication with folks, and to start that relationship and building power where people are, and coming in not to set up shop to tell folks how things are done, but instead to augment power that is already on the ground. We believe that democracy and America is better when all people are heard of, and we know there are certain communities that are left out, and that's who we like to focus on. The next one, the next slide is a little bit about our approach. And it's interesting, our approach hasn't changed all that much since COVID, although it was a huge interruption of such. You know, first, we have a full-fledged field program, like I shared with you. But I think one thing that we do a little different, at least I know we can compare that to the electoral space and others, is we don't hire a bunch of organizers here in Georgia, for instance, in Atlanta, and then shoot them out to all different places in Georgia. We're really about hiring within the communities that we serve and we are partnering with. So not only do we get experts of people who are working in, you know, hard to reach areas in Georgia and in other states that we work with, but we're also able and afforded the opportunity to give national best practice training to a whole new class of organizers that specialize in organizing and communicating with the communities that are so often left out of the conversation. We've done a lot to develop digital and technological infrastructure as well. Basically, when we learned that the census would be online for the first time, we immediately knew who would struggle with being able to fulfill that obligation of going on, logging in, and doing the census. And it's the same communities that are left out over and over again. So we tried to think creatively and figure out how we could bring the internet to those communities. So far, we had a goal to do 150 internet installations into counties and communities around the state where people felt safe to go and complete the census, not making them come to us, but putting them in places where they feel safe. COVID did interrupt that, but I think we're at 144 installations, and we pay for the data well beyond the census. We believe, again, that these are resources that are really helping communities over the long term. Perhaps when the census is done, they can also use it to register to vote, or to, get a absentee ballot, or use it to help find a job. We've held so many job fairs at our installation sites. Since COVID, we know that kids all over the state are logging in to our public installation sites to be able to do their homework. Faith institutions are able to do their services online, keeping folks from coming together. Other places we put these installations include barbershops, daycare centers, migrant healthcare or migrant farmer healthcare clinics, etc. So we're really excited about that work, and we see it's something that we're going to carry on long term into the future. We also partner with a lot of organizations on the ground. The list of places where we have those technological, or where we have our tech installations, are really similar to the people we partner with. We may partner with, who you might think we would, like the other sort of advocacy organizations on the ground, but we're just as likely to partner with a librarian or a barbershop if that's where people gather and feel comfortable and feel safe to learn more about civic participation. We do a lot with, we sort of have a campaign mentality when it comes to the census. We move at a pretty rapid speed, and to go with that, we also have a big series of TV and radio and digital advertising. In fact, we're in a partnership with Comcast right now, where our PSAs are being aired nationally, and will be through October on completing the census. So you might have had a chance to see them no matter where you are. And we care a lot about bringing, a rapid response sort of function. We didn't want to be an organization that set out to do X, Y, and Z and just check the box. We wanted to do X and then take a look around and find out if it was actually successful before moving to Y, or maybe we needed to go back to P. Whatever it was, we really pride ourselves on being nimble and entrepreneurial and really able to shift whatever the need is on the ground. And that attitude has come in quite handy this year. So I'll skip to the next one here. Again, this is sort of reiteration of some of our partnerships. I love the Kids Doc on Wheels one. This has been one of my favorites. There are 69 counties in Georgia's 159 counties that do not have a pediatrician. So we have partnered with Kids Doc on Wheels, which are amazing pediatricians who go out in vans to provide services and healthcare services for kids. And we were able to outfit them actually with hotspots and information so that they could do their census while they're waiting for their kids to be seen. We do a lot with the faith community. That's really important, particularly in the Deep South. Oftentimes in rural communities, it's the most trusted voice. We were thrilled when the AME Church was our first partner of 545 churches in Georgia, but we partner equally with other denominations, other faiths, imams, rabbis, etc. Because we know that so many of those places for community gathering are really great places to disperse information about civic participation and engagement as well. And then we do fun stuff like the I Count virtual bus tour, because we were doing a bus tour, 60 county bus tour, which was pretty exciting. And then COVID hit and we stopped very quickly. And we constantly reinvent the wheel and figure out what we can do to still engage people within their communities. We'll do the next one. I got ahead of myself a little bit with the internet installations across Georgia. But to the left of that, I'd say that this is one other really large program that we do. We're in partnership with a 4-year grant to offer commercially available church management software to communities of faith who otherwise would not be able to afford it. This is another one of those moments of serendipity. This has been a lifesaver for so many communities of faith during this time where they're not able to get together within their congregations, and instead are actually still able to communicate with one another. And it allows us, we worked with a firm out of Texas to build a dashboard that goes across the application so that we can communicate with the members and the pastors about the census and other matters of civic participation. It's been really great. And we're still signing up churches if any of you are familiar with anyone who might be interested in this, and we work with churches across the nation. And the next one? That's a good segue into Beyond Georgia. We are based in Atlanta, and we are definitely anchored in Atlanta for a lot of good reasons, but we are engaged in national efforts. When we first started, we learned rather quickly that there wasn't a lot of other organizations out in the nation, especially 501c3s, that were focused solely on the census. Hundreds of amazing organizations do good, get out the count work, but they do it among other things that they're doing and often have to squeeze it into their budget or bring someone on. And we were really granted, this gift to be able to think about the census 24 hours a day, which we do. And, and it really elevated us into the national dialogue and with other practitioners nationally to think about where are those needs and how we also could help fulfill them. So we started with national partnerships. People like our organizations like the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, BAJI, the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, the National Council for Negro Women, the national chapter of the Boule, which has 116 chapters throughout the nation, and more. And so what we're able to do is get organizations that already have like sort of voice and heft and give them everything we have, from our TV ads to our radio ads to information to talking points to speaker stuff at events, whatever it is that we need to do to be able to maximize our efforts to get a fair and accurate count. And now we're actually hiring in 5 other states as well, in places that were extraordinarily hard hit by the pandemic and also with a lack of infrastructure to begin with in civic engagement funding to help and add a little grassroots effort in those areas. So the next slide, again, is a highlight of our national and state partners. And we'll go ahead and go to the next one. And I will turn it over to Dr. Janine Abrams McLean to talk about the census a little bit and what's at stake.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm Janine Abrams McLean, and let's get started. I know a lot of y'all have all kinds of questions about the census. And again, as we're going through, if you have specific questions, please feel free to ask them. So why is the census important? The census is the bedrock of our democracy. It determines who receives power and resources a decade at a time. So every 10 years since 1790, the census has been conducted. It is a way that we count everyone in the nation and get a picture of what the nation looks like. And so the issues with the census, or why it's important, is that communities who don't complete the census don't receive their fair share of power, and their communities are left underfunded and under-resourced for a generation at a time. Data for the census guides the allocation of federal funding for schools, hospitals, libraries, safety net programs, and even for the roads and bridges that we drive on. And then one other thing, and I'll get to it in a second, but I'll also put in disaster recovery. And so participation in the census is going to be key to our recovery from the pandemic, as well as any other natural disasters that might come our way in this wonderful year that we call 2020. That keeps on giving. So we need to make sure that we participate in the census. And then the results of the census are used to reapportion Congress. I want you to keep that in the back of your head, because Rebecca's going to talk about some new news that came out about this when in the next section. So the data are used to reapportion Congress, thereby weighting the Electoral College, and they provide the data needed to redistrict our state and local political districts. So how the lines are drawn, that is based on the census data. Next slide, please, Tristan. The 2020 census will direct roughly $1.5 trillion annually to communities across the country based on over 300 federal programs. As was previously mentioned, these are programs for education. So Pell Grants, National School Lunch Programs, special ed grants to schools, Head Start programs. With healthcare, you're looking at Medicare and Medicaid, WIC, SNAP, CHIP, community mental health services, and so on. And then for infrastructure and more, as I said, highway planning and construction, foster care funding, environmental protection, a disaster recovery, and several other things. And so over 300, I think it's actually 316 federal programs, their funding is directed based on the census count. Next slide, please. The census also informs businesses and opportunities for economic development. It's the basis for the voting rights enforcement and civil rights legislation, and it provides population benchmarks for nearly every government effort. One of the stories that came out of Georgia, talking to some of our folks in the field, is that, you know, when you think of food deserts and people, you know, communities that do not have grocery stores, there was a community in Georgia where they were surprised that they got a Publix grocery store. But the reason the grocery store came there was because they had an accurate enough count that the company felt comfortable investing in putting a grocery store in that community. And so when you think of a lot of our communities that are historically undercounted, and as Rebecca said, marginalized and disenfranchised, a lot of those communities that have these food deserts are also the ones that don't have the numbers to pull people to come in and invest in those communities. And the census, participation in the census can help alleviate that issue. Next slide, please. So you're going to hear us talk a lot about hard to count populations. We refer to them as historically undercounted populations, but hard to count is a term that is used by the Census Bureau for these historically undercounted populations. But we don't like that term because it implies that there's something inherently wrong with these populations and communities that makes them hard to count, when in fact the systems that are put in place to count them are not adequate. And so when we talk about hard to count or HTC communities, we're talking about young children, highly mobile persons, racial and ethnic minorities, undocumented persons, LGBTQ persons, those who just don't trust the government, of which there are a lot, and those who don't live in traditional housing. And of course, you can read the rest of the list. But these are communities that are not adequately represented in the census. And we know that in the 2010 census, white homeowners were overcounted, meaning that they were counted more than once, and everybody else and every group represented on this list was undercounted. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to make sure is that we get a fair count and fair representation for everyone that is living in the United States. Next slide, please. So what's at stake for hard to count populations? Just for our purposes here today, I'm going to focus on racial and ethnic minorities. So before the pandemic, the Urban Institute estimated that, or they predicted that the 2020 census would be the worst undercount for Black and Latinx communities that we've seen in 30 years. And that was before the pandemic. And we know that Black and brown communities are disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. But if we just look at the numbers that they had, they estimated that 2.2 million Hispanic or Latinx people could be undercounted in the 2020 census. Based on just 56 federal programs, not the whole 316, just 55 federal programs, that would cost communities across the country $4.1 billion in lost federal funding every year for the next 10 years if that undercount happened. When we look at the Black community, 1.7 million people at risk of being undercounted, costing communities across the nation $3.3 billion annually. For the AAPI community, 305,000 people, costing $590 million to communities across the country every year. And then for the Alaska Native and Native American communities, at 103,000 people are at risk of being undercounted, costing communities $200 million in federal funding annually. So a lot of times people, we like to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks with regard to getting people engaged in the community or engaged in the census. And for a lot of people, that messaging of how much will be lost to their communities, not even just a decade, every year, is something that really speaks to them and messaging that has been impactful. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rebecca, who will talk about the challenges that we had going into the census and the ones that we are facing now.
I should unmute myself. So the challenges are immense, and we can go ahead and jump right into the next slide. We talked a little bit about the census being online for the first time ever. That's been really good too. We've gotten some really good results out of that, and it's been helpful. But again, it's not great for everybody. My mom doesn't even want to buy something on Amazon, much less fill out the information on the census. So there's a lot of different things that kind of come into play when you put something online for the first time. So there's been a lot of work to circumnavigate that. in addition to getting internet into the hands of people who don't have the access to it. But on top of that, the census itself was underfunded and understaffed for a long time. The census funding has been politicized in ways that we have not been able to imagine. It should be a very apolitical function from a very apolitical federal bureaucracy under the Department of Commerce. But instead, funding for the census and for getting field operations together and to be getting, all sort of the planning folks on the ground and ready to go was often held up in Congress with a lot of different appropriations bills where folks were fighting over things like the wall in between United States and Mexico, and it really it became sort of a bargaining tool in a lot of ways when it should not be. The administration also, this administration cut 39,000 questionnaire assistance centers. And think about that for a second. 39,000 stationary locations that were open in 2010 spread out over 50 states. That's a lot of coverage that the Census Bureau had in locations that were familiar to people, where they could go and talk to a real live person and say, hey, I have a question about the census or how to do it. The administration said instead they would do sort of a mobile response strategy where they would take like a van and go to different events and fairs and whatnot. One, we weren't happy with that strategy to begin with because it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But two, it hasn't been able to be put into effect at all because of COVID. So we have just lost a huge amount of infrastructure that allowed people to get help to do their census. We're constantly facing issues with the census that are antiquated, such as prison gerrymandering. And this is something that we can't fix in 2020, but that we can sure as heck get to work on for 2030. And I hope we all are able to do that. Prison gerrymandering is the action whereby people who are incarcerated in jail or in some sort of a detention center are instead counted at the location where they are incarcerated, instead of the community from which they come. So when we look at the systematic racism that is involved in our criminal justice system and how overwhelmingly, particularly Black and Brown communities are over arrested and over incarcerated, and that our private prison industry is overwhelmingly run in institutions in rural white communities, what happens is that the folks that are in these institutions, there's almost an incentive to make sure you go and make sure those facilities are full before April 1st, because that's where they're counted. And those counties and communities get more funding. And then they also are able to stack the deck when it comes to reapportionment and redistricting, giving more people who are not voting, oftentimes, those artificially inflated numbers within their districts, thereby making the distribution of power ridiculously unequal. It's something that about 6 states in the United States have banned for the practice of at least their state redistricting. And I'm so thankful for them, but it's something that we need to change federally, because it is pretty much unconscionable to the communities that are over targeted. We of course have the damage that came from the proposed and defeated citizenship question round 1 in 2019. So if you recall, when Wilbur Ross took over the Department of Commerce, he came out and said, hey, I got to help out the Department of Justice. We're going to put the citizenship question on because it's to help with the Voting Rights Act, which we all saw through, especially when Thomas Hellfeller died and his daughter uncovered all of those files like a living John Grisham novel that clearly stated why they were doing that, which was to secure partisan districts that were overwhelmingly white going forward. So that citizenship question went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said no, not on content, on the way that they put it on. So that question would be left to answer with other cases. Shortly thereafter, the president in 2019, I think it was in September, issued an executive order ordering the Census Bureau to start collecting citizenship data from other federal and state programs. So they've constantly been trying to think about a workaround to how to get the citizenship data for this upcoming apportionment and redistricting. And I'll talk about that more in just a second. We also have there's been a lot of fight for disinformation and misinformation campaigns. We see the same thing in our elections. The Census Bureau sort of tells it best when they say there's a pot of money and power right here. and everybody's kind of running towards it to claim their fair share by participating in the census. And there are some people that know that if the people behind them don't do the census, then they'll get more money and power. So they create fear, and they tell them that, you know, it could be dangerous for you too. They're going to share your information with ICE. They're, you know, folks that are worried about maybe there's somebody living with them with a warrant, or maybe they have too many people, more people living in the house than their lease says. Whatever it is, these sort of tactics come out in really egregious ways to try and get people to stir up, I guess, that mistrust in people of the government and of the census, when the census is actually some of the most protected data that exists within our federal government. Next slide. But then the pandemic hit and the whole world went to places in handbaskets, and we weren't entirely sure what was going to happen. So it was March, for us, it was March 12th. That was the day when Janine and I got together and told our staff, take everything home with you this weekend because we're going to practice teleworking. You know, you don't ever want to have somebody do it in the thick of it. You want to like get folks used to it first in case we need to, when we never came back. We quickly made the call to shut down our offices for the rest of the year, but it also shut down a lot of our events. This was 2 weeks before Census Day, when we were planning national rallies with everyone from, you know, Stacey Abrams and Ayanna Pressley and all these folks all over the country doing this huge press stuff. We had a bus tour. God, it was a beautiful bus, y'all. Big, said fair count. We loved it. You know, we were just that weekend before, we're driving to all sorts of places like Tubbleton, Georgia, a town of 900, where 150 of them came out for a census rally and hugging on everybody. You know, it's those interactions that so much of our work was built on, and it ceased to exist, like all of us have experienced very rapidly. So what it did to the census was it halted all field operations in just an unprecedented way. People could no longer be out there. They couldn't be going to work. They couldn't be going door to door. They couldn't be organizing various efforts. And so they halted those efforts. And every 2 weeks, they kind of extended that halt. And then the administration and the Census Bureau got together and said, we're going to extend the census to October 31st. Which means Congress is going to have to give their approval to extend the deadlines that are mandated by law for when we turn over apportionment data to April, and to redistricting data till July. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to get a fair and accurate census. Given that, they said if we were able to do that, they thought that they would know enough and be safe enough to start sending enumerators to come visit and knock on doors this August 11th, putting what is called the non-response follow-up period, moving it into the fall. We were, of course, very worried about this. The non-response follow-up period is often where a lot of undercounted communities are counted, and right now disproportionately African-American, Latinx, AAPI, and others are very undercounted in the census. And so we are relying on a robust NARFU, that's what we call it, NARFU, non-response follow-up period, to make sure that we get those folks counted. And that's also when census takers will go to homeless shelters. For anybody out there working in higher ed, I'm sure this is something that you've been dealing with, because colleges and universities were supposed to count their students on April 1, where they laid their heads, and they all got sent home in March. So it's been very difficult, and we just continually try and be nimble to respond in our works, and also keep an eye on what's happening in the federal government. And then the next one, and we're almost done here, just talking at you, but you know, so what does this mean? You know, the current challenges for this of instead of in-person outreach, we're having to do for the first time really testing digital outreach, phone-based efforts. You know, we're talking with the Census Bureau, who may or may not do some SMS texting to try and get people to do more with the Census Bureau. There's limited accessibility to that mobile questionnaire assistance staff, limited to none, I would say, that is out there. If we don't get people to answer, there's an increased use potentially of administration records and imputation because of the adjusted timeline. And imputation is one of those just kind of awful things that exist because there's not another solution out there that they have adopted. But let's say you live in a very gentrified neighborhood, and you know that white homeowners, you know, over the census have always been overcounted, and other communities have been undercounted. And so you go into a new neighborhood, and you know, you see a disparity in people doing the census. A bunch of white homeowners are doing the census. Other folks are not doing the census. Let's say they're African-American homeowners are not doing the census. The census will take a look at all the houses around or within a certain radius and decide, oh, if a certain number of them are white, then you must be too. And they will just decide for you what it is that you are in the community you represent, thereby really altering the face of communities. So it's something, again, that we really need people to do self-response and to take part in the NARFU to get the most accurate data. And again, we have enumerators that are supposed to start knocking on doors on August 11th. We don't know what that's going to look like. We don't know when the second wave is going to hit. If you live in the deep south, you've heard meteorologists predict that we're about to have the worst hurricane season on record, 2020. And so we don't know exactly how this is going to go. And that all leads us up to what has happened within the next 24 hours. So the next slide, please. Yesterday, it all hit the fan. The president signed an executive memorandum, which is very similar to an executive order and has a lot of weight and all that stuff to it, with the intent to exclude undocumented persons from being included in the overall decennial count. And most importantly, he went on for a couple of pages about how that would change apportionment. People widely came out and said this is blatantly unconstitutional. You know, the Constitution very clearly has always stated that we count all people, and the 14th Amendment was ratified to get rid of the 3/5 clause back when slaves were counted as 3/5 of people to give the South more power in the Constitution. And the 14th Amendment came out and said, nope, we're going to count, and it specifically says whole persons in each state. So it couldn't be more clear that we count everyone. A person is a person is a person. And it also put the authority in Congress to direct the Census Bureau on what they should and should not do. So the administration was acting outside of its scope of authority. That's widely agreed to by legal scholars and experts, and that the effort is blatantly unconstitutional. And that may be part of it to set up this, court challenge down the road. Although I just heard today that a federal judge has agreed to amend an existing complaint against the federal government for the executive order for collecting the data. And so that will go in there too. I assume that there will be some other legal actions filed. We're watching it sort of minute by minute. So what does that mean? It means, again, that there's this new flurry of distrust and fear, and should I participate in the census, and is it really safe, and is this becoming politicized? And in a time when we're in a pandemic and we're going to need these numbers more than we ever have before to recover, when at a time when we need, to make sure that we can still trust that there are nonpartisan functions of our government that try and uphold the ideals of our democracy, what is that doing to all of this, and what will be the outcome? And if we do go forth and change the way that apportionment has done, then certain states are going to gain more seats. Other states will lose seats. The weight of the electoral college will change drastically. And then the same data they're already pushing, because it's been kind of left open by the courts in a case called Evanwell, that's been left over as if states could go ahead and what we call CVAP, only use citizen voting age population to district their states going forward. And what that would result in is if everyone thought we already sort of lived in a gerrymandered universe, it would be an absolute revolution to the way that our districts and our political system is run. So we have a lot at stake. We definitely see sort of the plight of democracy, and we are waiting on bated breath because we actually expect some more kind of bad information to come this week. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Janine to talk about what we can do to make sure that we do get a fair and accurate count.
Thank you, Rebecca. And, I'm going to go back to the top. This census, and, especially after this section that's about the challenges, there have been challenges, as you just heard, about the census from day one. But we believe, going back to Rebecca's, we're full of hope, but we're also full of strategy, right? So we are everything that we can to make sure that we don't let all of this stuff get us down and just have us put our hands up and say, forget it, it's not, the census isn't going to work. because it is going to work and we can use your help to make it work. So next slide, please. What can you do? All right, so one thing we try to do all the time is to think big and be innovative. And we encourage everyone that we work with, whether they are organizations or individuals, the same thing for our staff, to think big. Anything that you think might work, we try it and see as close as we can get to it so that it'll be effective. And so that could be collaborating with those in your network to develop effective get out the count messaging, content, or activities. And if you have questions about what that type of messaging could be, we can definitely help you with that. You can also write blog posts, op-eds, and newsletters that highlight the importance of the 2020 census. One of the things that we pivoted to in the wake of the pandemic was we started a letters to the editor program in some of our, our rural communities, where we had our own organizers as well as volunteers and super volunteers that we call count captains write letters for, local newspapers about the importance of the census. And so that type of communication is also proven to be very effective with getting out the count. And then we, with everything that we do, we try not only to encourage the reader or the visitor to the website, but we ask them to then encourage others and to share to reach out to others in their networks to get the message out. You can support census efforts. This is particularly for foundations. The census was scheduled to end on July 31st. Fair Count is unique in that we do census. We came in to do the census as well as other civic engagement, but we are focused 24/7 on census. But other organizations, they have other programmatic duties that they have to fill. And the census sort of comes around every 10 years, and they have to move their staff and resources to handle that. They did that with the assumption that they would be done on July 31st. And now we have to go all the way until October 31st. And so there might not be money to do effective outreach. And so if you're a foundation who's already working with organizations that are engaged in census work, give them more money. They need it so that we can make sure that we get the message out and get a complete count. You can also use your platform and messaging expertise to help highlight the census as one of the 3 pillars of democracy, along with voting and redistricting. I think Sean said it at the beginning, the census is not the sexiest thing on the block, right? And if you think the census isn't sexy, look at its cousin, redistricting. Nobody gets excited about that. And so we're trying, with everything that we're doing, we're trying to really plant the seed that all of these things are things that people can be engaged in. I've had conversations recently with people where they've literally said, well, I didn't know that we could be involved in the redistricting process. Yes, you can. Make sure they don't chop your community up into little slices. Make sure they don't split your university in half. And so these are, if we can start planting that message of civic engagement and using the census as a catalyst for continued civic engagement, you can help us do that by sharing this message of the 3 pillars of democracy. You can offer census trainings and workshops for your staff and networks to educate them and to foster the development of creative ideas and strategies, particularly with regard to virtual outreach. We know that we have not even left the first wave of the pandemic. We're just now in a second peak in this pandemic. And I think Rebecca mentioned that, come fall, we're already in hurricane season, but, there's predicted 20 something hurricanes and anything else that might be thrown at us. And so we want to, I think we're going to be living in this digital world for a lot longer than many of us expected to. And so if there are ways that you can, and we can help with this, we can help with trainings. If you have staff members that, after they hear about the census and, they're ready to get engaged, we can help you get engaged. We're getting ready to start doing a lot of work. Well, we're already doing a lot of work with phone and text banking. Phone banking and text banking with other organizations. And so if you know of any organizations that, and they don't have to be in Georgia, that are interested in, having a day of action or 12, we will welcome them to come and, help us with phone and text banking to get the message out, as well as with other virtual outreach methods. And then lastly, just do everything you can to help get the word out about the 2020 census, because the next decade depends on it. And again, not to harp on the pandemic, but it's a big deal. And we know that the census will bring funding that will not only help us recover from the pandemic in 2021, because we'll still be recovering from it, but getting a fair and accurate count, we can help safeguard our communities in case something like this happens again. So a lot of the shortfalls in funding and support that we've seen in communities across the country as this pandemic has ravaged the nation, we can build infrastructure to help protect us from having to go through this again by making sure that we have a fair and accurate count. And so with that, I hope that everybody is now a census expert and nerd and is ready to get out there and make sure that we get a fair and accurate count. And we will open it up for questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you both very, very much. Gang, you can put your questions into the Q&A box as we always do. It's just adjacent to the chat, and our friend Janet has already put one in, so hopefully you'll join her. First question is, are there certain messages or campaigns about the census that are having more impact than others? That's the first part of her question. The second is, what's motivating people to see value in being counted and take part in the census? Are there some message? And then the third question is, are some messengers better than others? So certain messages and campaigns having impact, what's motivating people? And then are there certain messages that are better than others?
We can probably tag team this. I'll start with, are there certain messages that about the census that are having more impact than others? So it is, it might go into some other stuff too. We try to have community focused messages. So there are messages that resonate with immigrant communities that might not resonate with Black communities. 2 campaigns or 3 campaigns that we started specifically focused on the Black community. So in Georgia, the estimated undercount for the entire state is 177,000 people. Of that 177,000, 136,600 of them are Black. And so we have programs that are specifically targeted towards the Black community that are national programs. We have our Black Men Count program, specifically focused on making sure that Black men count, and we have messaging going out to that community. We have a partnership with the National Council for Negro Women called Sisters for the Census. Again, very specific messaging that harnesses the power that Black women have in the electorate and channeling that now to make sure that we're counted in the census and that families are counted. We also have, a national program called Black America Counts, again with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation that specifically, talks about what is lost in each state if Black and Latinx communities are not counted in the census. And so that's some specific messaging, but there's messaging for all types of communities. We can definitely point you to the direction to get some of those messaging, the messaging that has been really effective. And I think Rebecca wanted to sort of chime in too.
Yeah, because I think I know with the comms professionals too, there's been a lot of work and study out there with different polling and message testing to find out what works. And exactly what Janine said, I think some of the best research came out of Article 1, where they were really trying to define what would move people. And they worked both with the Census Bureau and also advocacy communities. And we did find that certain messages moved certain communities in different ways. One of the most interesting findings, for instance, for the Black and African American community, and we say Black and African American in Georgia too, because we want to be very inclusive of Black immigrants and other folks who don't, and make sure we're talking about the whole community, is that the whole idea of like, they're trying to take something away from you that's yours is really, really helpful. Messages of your data is safe resonate more with communities who think that it's not safe. So it is really trying to get to know who it is that you're speaking with. Right now, we have in the field, we're working with Civis Analytics, 2 different message tests. One, we're testing 4 messages about census and COVID recovery, because this is something that nobody tested for to begin with. You know, how is this message resonating about we're going to need, when we go into recovery, we're going to need all these resources. Two, you know, also in the midst of all of this, George Floyd was murdered. You know, people started talking about Breonna Taylor down in Georgia. Ahmaud Arbery was murdered. More and more. We're also testing messages about racial inequities too, because we know just by being practitioners that communities that are over policed are also undercounted in the census. And so we know what people lose from being undercounted in the census and how that plays out with systematic racism. So we're really trying to look at those different ways and be true practitioners in environment in real time to make sure that we're communicating in the most effective ways. And last, I think the part of the last question was, are some messengers better than others? Yes, but for different communities. So some communities actually really resonate with, the government tells me I have to do this and that it's the law and I can't break the law. You know, that those are the very law-abiding, I don't know, folks that just get stuff in the mail and trust it. There are other communities where it is trusted politicians or entertainers, et cetera, that, you know, sort of the normalizing of the census. The census is cool, just like voting is cool. So we try and use, based on the research that's out there, different messengers around the way. And specifically, I think, you know, we've toyed with that a little bit while we're doing more virtual organizing, because sometimes getting that big name, you know, when we have Maxine Waters on tomorrow, by the way, tune in to watch Your Own Janine with Stacey Abrams and Viola Davis to do an event. You know, that helps us. Sometimes that name, that gravitas, helps to bring people in. And the motivating question is really interesting too. The research overwhelmingly told us that people were motivated by the resources, laying claim to what's yours. This is the money that funds Head Start, schools, etc. We are starting to see a change in the resources, or in this research, since everything has gone so bonkers politically, and people are also responding to their fair share of political power and apportionment and redistricting at greater numbers than they were before in this message testing. And I'm excited to see where that goes.
So we're almost at the top of the hour. I will ask you, there's a lot of folks who work in the foundation and nonprofit space who are, and I know y'all are nonpartisan, but we're deeply worried when we hear things like census and it has a relationship with political power and resources that are distributed through politics, who are worried that somehow they might get sideways with their charter or with the IRS C3 designation that they have. Is there any reason for folks who are working in comms for good to be concerned about that?
No, the census is nonpartisan, and despite some people's you know, attempts to make it a partisan or political activity, it's a count. And you know, Fair Count is on the board of the, or not the board, we're on the state Complete Count Committee, and this is composed of Republicans, Democrats, independents, and whoever else. And at the end of the day, all we care about is making sure that everyone in Georgia is counted, regardless of their political affiliation. And so we are a 501c3, and we're not violating any laws. We're doing our job to make sure that everyone's counted.
All right, well,
Absolutely.
I will tell y'all, we, in my family, we had a conversation this morning about what this looks like and how folks could be undercounted. We made it real for folks. We had popsicles in the house, and we told the girls, one of you is going to get counted and one of you isn't. The one who gets counted gets the popsicle. Did not land very well with the person who did not get the popsicle.
Oh,
Pleased to know everybody ended up getting a popsicle, but they got a good lesson and resources and what it looks like when you don't get counted.
And actually what you should have done, if you want to do this again, if you have the popsicles, give the popsicle of the person that would have gone to the person who didn't get counted to the one who did get counted.
Ooh,
that's what happens with the fund. They don't disappear. They get shifted to communities that were counted.
2 popsicles for one and none for the other. That's really going to resonate. I will try that. I will let y'all know how it goes. To everybody who joined us, thank you. Please get the word out. We will make a recording of this. And Rebecca and Janine, I'm not going to put them too much on the spot, but they have agreed to come back. So you will see them at V. I think they're going to be in conversation with our friend Bertus Downs from REM. So more on this soon, but there's just a little bit of time left to get this all right. and it's a very good chance we get this wrong, and the impacts will sit with us for a year. So not for a year, for 10 years, which is an extraordinary thing to think about as we're forging our way into the future. Imagine having a hand tied behind your back. We can't afford that. So with that, everybody, thanks for being with us. We will follow up. And to Janine and Rebecca, thank you very, very much for your time. Deeply appreciate all the good work y'all are doing.
Thank you.
Be safe and well, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.